Izuchis, kill them!
Really?
Yeah, we're dangerous.
Okay, maybe you were a year and a half ago, but...
What are you saying?
Just that maybe your danger level ends when we can kill an elder dragon.
Look, we're doing our best here.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, when it comes to Monster Hunter, there are a few very important monsters. Of course, elder dragons are the big bads at the end of each game, and flagships are significant for the way that the entire game will just sometimes shape around their existence, but I'm not talking about any of those today. No, I'm going to be talking about the monsters that give you your first impression of each individual game, the literal first large monster you fight in every Monster Hunter game, excluding expansions, of course, as the first monster of an expansion is G-Rank/Master Rank, and thus a totally different beast. I will be ranking them, but of course, if it was just done in a normal fashion, you just get my fully biased favorite, so instead we are going to give them a bit of a different criteria for ranking. I'm going to split this up into 6 categories, give each monster their ranking within each category, with points being based on its ranking compared to the others, and then at the end, the monster with the most points overall will be hailed as the best first monster of all time, according to me at least. So, what are the monsters then? Well, for first gen, it's Velocidrome, of course. For second gen, we have Giadrome. For third gen, it's the Great Jaggi. In Monster Hunter 4, it is Seltas. In Monster Hunter Generations, we've got Great Maccao. Then in Monster Hunter World, we have Great Jagras. And then finally, Monster Hunter Rise, of course, has Great Izuchi. These are our contestants today. We'll be ranking them in 6 separate categories, and rather than just list those here, I'll let you see how it works as it all unfolds. So let's begin with our first monster of the day, Velocidrome. This great raptor is the first large monster that you ever fight in a Monster Hunter game, and so that context of course has to be considered when talking about it in this way. Visually and physically their design is alright, but I don't find it anything too particularly write home about. The claws are neat, the crest is cool, and their coloring is interesting too. As far as their lore and ecology goes, they are of course a pack-based monster. The Velocidrome is the leader of their pack, simply being the biggest and strongest among them. As far as prey, for the most part these creatures will go after the livestock of farmers in the area, which is the main reason why they become the targets of hunters in the first place. If a Velociprey in its pack is in danger, it will call out, and then the Velocidrome will come running to help it. And this works the other way too, where if a Velocidrome calls out, members of its pack will come to back it up as well. Velocidrome are also known to occasionally get into fights with each other over territory, as again, their main food source is livestock, and so the territories are somewhat limited. As far as its role within the greater game, literally all of the monsters today are the first monster that you fight, and so that won't really be taken into consideration for obvious reasons. As far as a greater role, though, Velocidrome itself doesn't really make an appearance again, but the Velociprey themselves are a big part of the opening cutscene for Monster Hunter 1, and so we will count that towards Velocidrome in this case too. In the cutscene, you see a couple of Velociprey managing to hunt down a smaller Aptonoth, only to be taken over by a Rathalos flying in to steal their prey and take it away. A small moment, but an important one to show the pecking order in the region, the food chain, so to say, and it shows just how vast the difference is in power between these two species of monster as well. Past that, we have a category of how well the monster will teach new hunters how to play the game. Velocidrome is a simple creature, and considering it is the first Monster Hunter game, that is honestly fair enough. It teaches you the basics of dodging, of certain body parts being weaker to hit than others, but it doesn't do a whole lot else with its relatively basic moveset, and the same sort of goes for the overall fight quality here too. It is super basic, but functional. Then when you go back at it in full-on endgame gear, it just doesn't prove much of a challenge at all. It can be a fun experience, just slaughtering a tiny little Velocidrome, but I don't know if I would consider it a great experience either. And so the rankings for this monster are as follows. For aesthetics and physical design, it is getting 2 points. For its ecology, it gets 3 points, which is tied with some other monsters as they are difficult to separate here. For context within the greater game, it gets 4 points simply for its involvement with the food chain being shown in the opening cutscene. For teaching new players the basics, I will give this one a 4, simply because this is literally the first large monster in the entire series, and so it does get a bit of a bump from being the initial teacher to all early hunters. For fight quality, however, it gets 2 points tied with some others. And then finally, for how it feels when you go back to it and fully geared and endgame experienced, it gets 3 points, again tied with one other. As a result, Velocidrome's total points wind up at 18 out of a maximum 42.
That's a lot of points!
Now that you have a feel for the concept we're going for here, we'll try to move just a bit faster for the other monsters, alright? For Giadrome, it's a bit hard for him to stand out. After all, he is just sort of white Velocidrome, to the point that in Monster Hunter 1, there was literally a rare sighting of a white Velociprey around, and then in the second generation, they just turned that into its own proper monster, living in Arctic regions. For the most part, it is seen as a subspecies of Velocidrome, but not a particularly interesting one, really. Ecologically speaking, they do have a bit of uniqueness compared to Velocidrome, specifically in that they will actually work together together with other Giadromes sometimes to secure food for both of their packs, rather than simply fighting over territory against each other. And I do find that interesting, especially considering that they live in an Arctic region, and so smaller prey would thus be less plentiful. They don't really have any context within the greater game outside of themselves, so they do struggle a bit in that sense. As for teaching players hunting, I do think that they do a pretty decent job. They have the base Velocidrome moveset, of course, but they gain a freezing spit that can turn you into an ice ball, which I think is just sort of important in this context, as it both teaches you about the context of projectiles and also of statuses, at least in the first place. As for the fight as a whole, I just don't consider it overly interesting. It adds a slight bit over Velocidrome, but nothing crazy, and then when you go back to fight it fully geared and endgame experienced, it can just be a touch annoying as the snowball mechanic is still a thing. I don't think it makes it more interesting at that point in your journey, as it's just a slaughterfest against a monster like this, but the snowball itself can turn that slaughterfest into a tiny bit of an irritant. As far as points go, for category 1, this only gets 1 point, as it's just another Velocidrome, but without much change. For category 2, it gets 3 points, tied with Velocidrome with all things considered. For category 3, it gets 3 points as well. I think it does teach more than Velocidrome does. Velocidrome does, of course, get that bump for being the first overall teacher to hunters anywhere. In the fight quality category, it gets 3 points, as it is just a Velocidrome with a little bit more. And then for the final category, it gets 2 points for a total of 15 out of a maximum of 42. After that, we come to Great Jaggi, the first large monster of the 3rd generation. Visually, this one is a bit fun, more interesting than the other basic raptors up to this point, at least in my opinion, and I like the more down-to-earth color scheme that it has too, the fun frills that it has on its head and such. Ecologically, they are definitely more fun than a lot of these monsters, simply for how they work to become the alpha of their pack. Jaggi and Jaggia will hunt with a Great Jaggi to take down larger prey like an Aptonoth, but when they do so, the Great gets to eat first, then the larger Jaggia get to eat, and then finally the tiny little Jaggis. As a result, the Jaggi can wind up underfed and decide to leave the pack. Many Jaggi without a pack just won't survive in the wild, but if they can manage to do so by hunting fish and other small prey, they can eventually turn into a Great Jaggi themselves and return to their pack to challenge the other Great for its position as alpha and leader of the pack. As for greater game context, this sort of mirrors the Velocidrome, except the Great Jaggi itself is actually involved in the opening cutscene for the game rather than just the smaller pack monsters. It leads the pack to an Aptonoth hunt, only to be interrupted by a Rathalos who again steals the Aptonoth for itself. As for teaching, I don't think the Great Jaggi meaningfully does any more than anything else in any particular way, and so it is tied for bottom of the pack in that section. The fight itself is alright, but not fantastic by any means, just a lot of basic physical moves, and then when you go back to hunt it in the endgame when you are fully geared out, it's just a bit of fun. Pretty much equal to Velocidrome in my opinion, just a simple but enjoyable slaughter. As far as the points go, for aesthetic I gave the Great Jaggi 3 points, for ecology it got 4 points, tied with one other as second last, for context it got 5 points, just slightly above Velocidrome as it actually shows its face in the opening cutscene rather than just the little ones, 2 points for teaching, tied with one other monster, a tied 2 points for the fight as a whole, and then 3 points for the experience of going back to fight it at the end of the game for a total score of 19 out of a maximum of 42 points.
You're gonna be the new leader!
Next in our midpoint is of course Seltas, and by god is this a good one. The vast majority of first monsters within the series are raptors, some have some quirks, but they are still just raptors. Seltas, this is just a crazy bug thing, and the fact that this is the first monster of the 4th generation makes me absolutely understand people who say that the 4th gen is their favorite Monster Hunter experience. It goes right out of the gates guns blazing. This creature is aesthetically beautiful and totally unique. Ecologically, it is of course a full-on insect, and it has all of its interesting mixings with Seltas Queen too, which of course also brings us to its context within the greater game. Most first monsters don't really show up again in quests properly, and definitely not with story context as well, but then we have Seltas, who is an integral part of Seltas Queen as a monster, who I consider somewhere on the list of the greatest monsters ever made. Without Seltas, Seltas Queen wouldn't be anywhere close to as cool or impactful as it is, and so it absolutely holds the crown for this slot as far as I'm concerned. As far as teaching players the game, it is a bit of an odd one, but definitely a good one. It can give defense down as a debuff, which teaches you about the concept of blights in a way that even makes it a bit more threatening, and its moveset is far from a standard raptor, taking a lot more speedy and aerial shenanigans about the place. The fight as a whole is pretty great, in my opinion. I'm a big fan of it, and then as far as going back to fight it when you've reached the end game and completed your build, I think it is overall one of the best options on this list, at least too. It is still a bit of a smash, but it's a fun smash, a unique smash compared to the others. As for points, Seltas gets a full 7 points for aesthetic, being the best among the group, 6 for ecology and lore, 7 points for its context in the greater game, 5 points for teaching new hunters the ropes, 7 points for its overall fight, and then 6 points for the final category, for a total of 38 out of a maximum of 42 points.
38!
Then moving on to Great Maccao, then, this one is quite fun too. I consider it to be the second best looking one of the raptors at least, but this one is definitely designed to be reasonable more than cool. Its ecology is neat. Unlike most of the other pack-based raptor monsters, its little ones have much less of a proper connection to it. They will flee if they sense danger, and if the Great Maccao's head feathers are broken, then the little Maccao just won't follow it at all. As for the context within the greater game, Great Maccao doesn't really get any of that, and so it ties for the bottom rank with a few others. As for how it teaches players, I actually think this one is one of the best teachers we've had. It may not have any elements or statuses, but the way that it fights is quite unique to the others. It has a lot of really noticeable telegraphs, and it is actually capable of kicking your ass if you don't respect it and make a point of trying to understand its moveset. As well, you can knock it over by getting a tail flinch while it's standing on top of the tail, so I just think it does a fantastic job as a teacher here. The fight as a whole is one of the most enjoyable of this bunch as well to me, but the experience when going back to hunt it in endgame is a little bit middling. Definitely better than most of the monsters, but not as fun as some others either, in my opinion. For aesthetics, I scored it 4 points, ecology also 4 points, tied with Great Jaggi, tied 3 points for category 3, then 6 points for its teaching for new players, and another 6 points for its overall fight, with a middling 4 points for the final category, leaving it with a total of 27 out of a maximum 42 points. Second last today, let's talk about Great Jagras. This is an absolutely wonderful, beautiful monster, and the first fanged wyvern added to the series that wasn't a Zinogre, which is a big deal all in itself. Ecology-wise, these creatures are absolutely fascinating to watch. Even within the game itself, the way that they will eat up an Aptonoth and then spit out remains to the little Jagras like a mama bird is just lovely. As well, they have a similar process to the Jaggi, where male Jagras that reach a certain size will attempt to go out and fend for themselves. Most of them will die, but some will become large and strong, and then come back to attempt to fight the other great Jagras for control of their pack. Their hair-like strands coming out of their heads are actually scales that represent both strength and age, and so the longer these are, the greater the great Jagras. On top of this, if you break their mane, other Jagras will just sort of lose all respect for it, so it's actually very important to them. The context within the greater game with this one is pretty solid too. Of course, we have the whole feeding the Aptonoth thing. It also has a turf war, with Anjanath being the only first monster to have a turf war, and yes, this mechanic was only added in 5th generation, but it does definitely matter for this category. And then also the Deviljho cutscene is heavily centered around a Deviljho trying to full-on swallow a great Jagras, which he can also use as a weapon in hunts by picking them up in the open world, so he has some really solid context with other monsters and in the greater game. I would rate him only slightly lower than Seltas, who becomes an integral part of a whole other monster. As for his teaching other players, he does a fantastic job in my opinion. He has some varied moveset of course, some pretty good telegraphs, and most importantly, he teaches people properly about weak spots. When he gets fatigued, he will run off to eat an Aptonoth. When he eats an Aptonoth, his body will swell up. It takes loads more damage when it's swelled up, and if you manage to reach a threshold of belly damage, you can make him spit up his lunch and get a free knockdown on him too. It is near perfect as a way of teaching new hunters what large monsters are about. The fight itself is pretty good, and I honestly think it is the most enjoyable of this list to fight when you're fully endgame geared as well. It is a slaughter like the others, but the whole belly mechanic just gets more fun too as it pops up so easily. Overall, the Great Jagras gets 6 points for aesthetic, 7 points for ecology, 6 points for greater game context, 7 points for teaching new players, 5 points for the overall fight, and 7 points for the return journey when finishing the game, giving it a total of 38 points out of a maximum of 42.
38.
Then finally, Great Izuchi, the newest addition to this grouping of monsters. Aesthetically, I think this one is definitely solid. It is the same general shape as the other raptors, but I think the way that his face looks, its little evil looking eyes, its beautiful orange fur, and of course its big old scythe tail. As far as ecology, the Izuchi are a bit neat. Of course they are pack hunters again, but the specific way that these work are that the Great Izuchi will actually pick the 2 strongest male Izuchis and take them with him to hunt, almost like he handpicks his squad, which is a neat touch over some of the other raptors. As for context in the greater game, he just doesn't really get much, not even a single turf war to his name, and so he ties for the lowest score in this category. As for teaching new players, I did rate him fairly low. His telegraphs are decent, which I think is important for teaching new players how to play the game, but this fight is pretty unique compared to everything else in the game. Nothing else fights with 3 entities at the same time, so while it does teach you things, it doesn't necessarily teach you how to be better at the game to come. As for the fight, I thought this was really good. I enjoyed a reasonable amount, and then as for coming back at the end of the game to stomp on it, I think this is one of the more enjoyable ones for sure. I just This has a lot of fun reactions to the damage that you do to it, its flinch and knockdown animations are really fun, and you can absolutely dust it in no time flat if you know what you're doing, which is also enjoyable. Overall, I gave it 5 points for aesthetic, 5 points for ecology, 3 points for greater context, 2 points for teaching, 4 points for the fight overall, and then 5 points for the final category, giving it a total of 24 points out of the maximum of 42. With all the monsters scored then, let's round up the end tallies. In last place we had Giadrome with only 15 points, sorry buddy. Then in 6th with 18 points was Velocidrome. In 5th with 19 points was Great Jaggi, just slightly edging out its raptor brother. In 4th with 24 points was Great Izuchi. In 3rd with 27 points we have Great Maccao. And then tied for first place with 38 points each are Seltas and Great Jagras. These two absolutely dominated. The top spot for each category went to one of these two every single time. I just think they are absolutely exceptional among first monsters of a game. If I had to personally choose between them based on everything I've talked about today, I think I would lean towards Seltas, but given the numbers say it's a tie, I'm happy to say that they tied and both can take this title home today. I hope you've all enjoyed this, a bit of a different look at ranking monsters, definitely more involved, and I must say that I do think this lines up with what I probably would have ranked them as even off the top of my head, at least for the most part, so I think that the system definitely works. Let me know your thoughts, of course, if you think any of these should be swapped and why you believe so. Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.